and welcome back to the Team JLX podcast. It's me, Xander, as always, and I hope you're having the most wonderful start to your week, or end to your week, depending on when you are listening to this podcast. Today we have another client Q&A coming at you, and if you watched or listened to the last one, you will know that a few weeks ago I asked our team inside our team chat if I could have answered some questions for you before you started your fitness journey. What questions would you have asked me? So basically, a lot of the questions we've got aren't relevant to those individuals now, but they would have been super relevant to them when they started. And the whole idea of us running this as a podcast is that I want to meet you guys where you're at. And if you're listening to this podcast, you may well be a member of our team, and therefore you might pick up on some new bits of information you maybe not thought to ask. Or if, like, one of our questions coming up today is on cardiovascular nutrition, in terms of how we can optimize nutrition for cardiovascular activity, it might be of interest to you. But equally, if you're not part of our team, it may well be that these are questions that you would really like answered, and you will gain a lot from having them done so. So I'm excited to get into this. We've got 5 questions coming at you today. We have one on recovery. We've got one on being massive and bulky, which I know is a massive concern to many women who are starting their fitness journey. We've got one on what happens after the fat loss journey. And then we've got a question on timing around standard workouts, but also shorter and longer runs. And then some macros in terms of the optimal for those results, and obviously feeling good and great after the training. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and we are going to get stuck in. So the first question is, how important really is recovery? How to detect overtraining, and how do I know that my body needs rest? So I've kind of folded this question into one, and we'll start at the very beginning. How do we know our body needs rest? How do we know what's overtraining? Now, for those of you who are starting your training, all the data that you're getting back from your body is going to be absolute garbage. So please don't listen to that, because if you have not trained for a while, if you have never trained in a gym, or if you've taken a little bit of a break from a certain exercise, all of those things are going to create a great deal of soreness for you. Soreness is not something to be scared of. Soreness is actually a fairly good metric of training. I'm not going to go into that today, but it is something we use within our team. It's something we are paying close attention to at all times within the training blocks our clients are in. So the first week of training is going to drive a great deal of stress to the muscle, because novelty is one of the biggest. Am I going to say that? Yeah, I am going to say that. Novelty is one of the biggest drivers of muscle soreness. So novelty meaning either you've not done it before, you've not done it a long time, or you've just had a lot of time out. So in terms of that, we shouldn't be listening to the signals our bodies are giving off in the first couple of weeks. What we need to rely on is a standardized metric. And for me, that is going to be VIF: volume, intensity, and frequency. Now, these are the main 3 things, so that's why it's been termed VIF, because they come together, that will determine the amount your body is able to handle for optimum input and then obviously output in terms of result. So if you are training in a gym, right, and you are thinking, right, well, where the hell do I start? What I would always look at is, how do I set an average level of volume? Because when you get the level of volume right, and then you can then look at intensity. So right, we're going to start at, say, RIR 2 to 3. So for our clients, we use RIR, and that basically means we're going to be 2 or 3 reps away from failure. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then obviously in terms of frequency, we tend to level our volume out throughout the week. So if we've got 3 leg sessions, we will spread the volume out through those 3 leg sessions. We won't just pile it all into one. I mentioned a moment ago that I would come back to intensity and RIR. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that if you're new to training, you won't be able to pay a huge amount of attention to the data that you're getting back. For example, if we look at RIR, that's going to move so much between the first session that you do and the 6th session, because your body's going to adapt super fast, it's going to adapt really quickly. So what that means is that if we say, right, I'm going to start at RIR 2 and I'm just going to gradually, progressively overload. Great, that is a typically good way of doing it. But you might end up holding yourself back a huge amount purely because you're going to be adapting super fast. And what we need to be doing is keeping up with that and adding new stimulus so we keep that adaptation moving forwards. Put in layman's terms, what we're saying is that your body is going to both recover and improve very quickly when you first begin. So if you don't if you don't increase the amount of weight that you're using or the amount of volume you're using, then essentially you're going to be holding yourself back because your body is ready to adapt, it's ready to improve, it's ready to progress, but you need to give it a reason to do that. All right. So the biggest thing when it comes to how much we can manage is not to do with how much you can recover, it's to do with how much you're giving yourself to do. The reason that we go with that is because that is the most controllable element. The most controllable element of any training and recovery process is the amount that you do. It doesn't matter if you have the best recovery process in the fucking world, given to you by the best science and performance programs, that there are. If you do too much, you will not be able to recover from it. So that's why I've started with this. The most important thing when it comes to recovery is how much you are doing, okay? And we look at, in terms of gym training, we'll look at VIF, volume, intensity, frequency. So the next part of that question, so how important is recovery? So recovery is very important because if you nail the amount of volume that you can do, but then you don't have any recovery process, you don't eat well, you don't recover and sleep well, and generally your life isn't very restful, the ability your muscles are going to have to both recover from what you've just done and then grow. And that's a really important thing. Muscle growth and recovery are not the same thing. We need to recover from something and then we grow from it, okay? If we are not recovering properly, we are not going to grow properly, and therefore we are not going to see the improvement and adaptation that you really do deserve from the hard work you've put in, because you've only done half of it, right? Half of it is that work that you've done in the gym. The other half is stress relief, it's recovery in terms of rest, and of course it's going to be nutrition and sleep. So those parts are very, very important. And I can't remember who came up with this saying, but you can only grow from what you recover from. So if we can't recover from something, we can't grow from it. And it's a really important thing to remember if you're looking to build a physique, not just lose body fat. If you're looking to just lose body fat, recovery is going to be slightly different. But for those of you listening to this podcast, I know it's going to be the fact that yes, you want to lose body fat, but equally you want to have bigger glutes. You want to have nice shoulders, nice arms. So when you wear that dress, not only are the glutes popping, but we're looking really toned as well. Now, how we detect overtraining then comes in a slightly different way, because there are loads of different ways to look at overtraining, and it's a massive topic. I could probably do a podcast in and of itself. One of the things I remember talking about a long, long time ago now was, is it overtraining or is it under recovering? And I spoke about this on a podcast maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. And the reason I talked about it like that is because actually overtraining is a thing for sure, but a lot of people are hammering themselves into the ground and expecting their bodies to recover. They're training in the morning, they're running after work, they're not getting good sleep because they're then working later. So we really do have to look at this equation in the whole, not just in the recovery. It needs to be the input, the recovery, and the lifestyle factors that fundamentally uphold all of this. Because like I said, if I work with a lot of people who are very high up, so managing directors, CEOs, CFOs, and for all of those individuals, stress is incredibly high. So it doesn't have the same set of rules that somebody who, say, is a student is, right? So if you're a student, you're going to have a lot easier time when it comes to recovery. I'm not doubting that exams and things like that are stressful, but typically you're living a much more manageable life than someone who is a CEO of a multi-million-pound company who's working 12 to 14 hours a day and is having to squeeze everything in around that, let alone family life, recovery, sleep, so on and so forth. So we do have to look at circumstances. Very, very important. Overtraining, for me, I'm going to put this into 3 phases. I'm literally just made this up now, but I think that this probably fits pretty well. There are 3 phases to overtraining. The first phase is where we're tired and sorer than usual. So a more chronic level of muscle soreness. We're not recovering as well between sessions. This is the first stage. Now, 9 times out of 10, when this stage happens, it's usually week 4 or 5 in a program. We've got deload coming up anyway. So to be honest with you, we're like, okay, look, fine. This is part and parcel of the way the program works. We're fine, we're in a good position. I'd rather you felt like this and you were completely undertrained at this point, because we're going to have a deload week coming up shortly anyway. So that's the first phase. The second phase is then we get through that deload week. Soreness is high, sleep is very, very high. So typically people will sleep a lot more, or their requirement for sleep is much, much higher. Then we're looking at the more psychological mindset elements, requirements in terms of our desire and motivation to train. Also things we track on a weekly basis inside Team JLX for our clients. People will say, oh, you know, you don't need motivation to train. No, but it's bloody helpful when you do have it. And it's also very important because many of our clients have huge amounts of motivation. So when they don't have that anymore, all of a sudden that rings some alarm bells for me, a couple of red flags, woo. It's important to note that many people build motivation through the program. So if you're listening to this thinking, shit, I got no motivation, many of them didn't either. That's why they started with us. They started with us because they lack motivation, they lack the drive, they lacked what they thought they needed to really get going. Turns out it's a very different process all in all, and when you get that process going, motivation magically reappears again, and it's a wonderful situation for everyone. But again, the conversation for another day. So then we get into that third phase. So the second phase is, right, okay, maybe we need to look at a complete week off and then a deload. So what I would call an active recovery, I encourage our clients to take 2 of those a year, 2 full weeks out of training, usually backed up with a deload week. So you essentially have a week off and then a deload week together, because then you're really looking at clearing that fatigue level. What was the next thing? So then the third phase is then when our desire to training goes through the floor, feeling slightly depressed, low. Some of you, that might show as anxiety, where we're starting to really overthink things, compare ourselves. Our desire to train, our body dysmorphia may take a higher level at that point. And generally speaking, I think the third phase is going to be far more mindset. You will have more soreness, you will have more lethargy, you will be more fatigued and more tired. But I think it's at this third stage of burnout, shall we say, the final stage, where the more psychological mindset elements really do take hold. So to answer your question, I would say that recovery is very, 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 very important. But it's only as important as the inputs that you create to start with. So if you nail all the things of recovery, but you just training twice a day, you're not taking care of the volumes and the intensity, then recovery is not important at all, because you've already messed up the thing that matters the most. Okay, so we need to look at all aspects of recovery, why so much recovery is required, not just recovery in and of itself. And hopefully that answers your question. Okay, next question we've got is from Jenny. And again, like I said at the start, these are not questions people have asked now. They're questions that they would wanted to have known the answer to many, many moons ago. I don't want to be massive and bulky, so do I just eat less protein? Now, when I read this, I actually cracked a little bit of a smile. And I cracked a little bit of a smile because this is a really interesting concept that I don't believe many people have spoken about. Certainly, it's not something that I really considered a huge amount, because everyone talks about the importance of protein and muscle gain. So if you're someone thinking, well, I don't want to be jacked as fuck and I'm really worried that I'm going to look like a bloke, right then, the thing that everyone talks about is lowering my protein. So what I should do, increasing my protein. So what I should do is just lower my protein. If I lower my protein, I'm not going to get as bigger muscles, which actually from a completely logical sense does make sense to me, and I understand that. So how I would answer that is this: people mostly fear the things they don't understand, and it's easy to fear something we've never seen either A, within ourselves, or have never pursued within ourselves. A fear of success is something that I do believe many people suffer with, that shows itself in many different ways. And in this instance, what we're saying is, I fear looking like that. And I think there's a number of reasons why that may be. And we won't go into those today because they'll take ages for me to discuss. But what I will say is this: there is nobody I've ever worked with who has A, become quote unquote bulky, B, when they've been through that muscle gaining phase and they've gone through that process, has ever regretted it, or C, I think protein has never had anything to do with these things. One of the things I do believe is true is that many women look at other women who have been on bulking phases. Now, I have been through this time and time again. I think that the term, I don't ever use the term bulking. You'll never hear me use that term. The reason I don't like it is the connotations that it has. And those connotations are that you're going to get very big, you're going to get very I'm not going to use the word bulky, but we're going to look very large compared to what we would be used to. And equally, I do believe that most women who go on bulks do gain a lot of body fat. And as a result of that, I termed the term gaining phase a very long time ago, not because I want to reinvent the wheel, but because I wanted to get away from that connotation. We are looking to gain muscle. That is the priority of a gaining phase. It is not to get bulky. I also think that, and this is a harsh truth for some of you, most people who do get bulky in gaining phases have done it wrong. They've seen it as an opportunity to actually satisfy the part of their brain that wants to eat all the nice food because they've been through loads of restriction before. They've got no structure to their gaining phase. They're probably anxious about gaining fat, so instead of managing that anxiety, they actually go for a self-fulfilling prophecy of enabling that to happen. Why do I think that? Because these are things that have happened to me. I know that when I've been very lean in the past and I have gone into gaining phases, it gets to a point where I think, well, if I'm not going to look lean anymore, I might as well just get to the point where I'm not looking lean anymore and going to get this middle bit over with. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, that doesn't help. And there's some of you listening to this who probably feel exactly the same. Yeah, like, I know I'm going to not be lean anymore, so I just want to get to that next bit so I can get that over and done with, then I can get lean again. But actually, in doing that, we end up gaining loads of fat. The next diet phase isn't half as successful as that first one was, and we get ourselves into a bit of a mess, into a bit of a cycle which we don't want to be in. So overall, I would say no, eating less protein is not the way. I would say managing your calories, making sure that you have a structure and a long-term plan, which feeds very nicely into the next question. So I'm going to go just to that one now, which is from Dan, which is, having completed a fat loss recomp phase and established a baseline you are happy with, what is the recommended length of time to gain, or can it be open-ended? So, just like with my fat loss phases, I like my gaining phases to be well structured. For me, fat loss phases tend to be much better when they're short and sharp. Okay, we get into the flame and get back out again. I personally, for people who this works with, do not see any point in time dragging a fat loss phase out. If I can get something done in 10 weeks that many people would say, oh, let's do 18, that's 10 weeks where that person is focused, is driven, is getting great results, feeling more motivated as a result of that. But not just that, that's a further 8 weeks where we can get those calories back up, get them enjoying more freedom around food and enjoying more energy for the body then to get more out of the training. So you're going to get double the results in the long term if you can nail fat loss phases in a short space of time. It doesn't work for everyone. And if you're going to be more aggressive, I definitely recommend doing it with a qualified coach. I am not saying go and do an aggressive fat loss phase by yourself. It probably won't work and you will end up in a worse place than when you started. What I will say is that if you get a qualified coach, and I'm not talking about somebody who's had a coach once and decided to become a coach, that does not make them qualified. I'm talking about somebody who's been there and done it with many people, knows exactly how to do it, right? We know how we do things because we have a huge amount of science to back it up, but even more client results, even more client experience, which tells us exactly how that science is practically inputted, not just, oh, here's a piece of paper, wicked, let's just follow that, because that doesn't work for most people either. So what's really important is that you make sure you get qualified help, not just help. So with a fat loss phase, as I said, if we can get something done in 10 weeks, let's do it in 10. Gaining phases are slightly different. Now, when we look at gaining phases, I like to reverse engineer these, where I'll say, right, the aim here for us is to gain 5% body weight. So if you're, let's say, for example, you're 60 kilos, let's look at gaining 5 kilos, let's look at gaining 3 kilos, because that would be 5%. Let's look to gain 5%. And how does that look for us? Okay, well, if we go at the slowest rate, let's say it takes us 10 weeks. If we go, fast rate, it takes us 10 weeks. At the slow rate, it takes us 20. Okay, right, so let's plan for 20, right? Let's plan for 20, let's go nice and slow, because we're not super lean, we're also not got a huge amount of fat mass, so actually we can actually enjoy a little bit less pressure around nutrition and a little bit less structure, still aiming towards the goal. So let's say 20 weeks, right? Okay, so at week 15, we've just hit our 3 kilo mark. Let's have a really good look at progress. Let's look at training progress. Let's look at your physique photos, and let's look at measurements. Now, these should be things you're looking at all the way through this process, not just after 15 weeks. We tend to look at these measurements on a 6-weekly basis because your physique isn't going to change that much week to week, so there's no point hyper-focusing. And for us, especially with gaining phases, one of the biggest things we focus on is the training, because actually that is the thing that is going to grow you that muscle. So we get to 15 weeks, and actually what we've decided is, hey, we can't see a huge amount of difference in terms of body fat. We are starting to look a bit more muscular, which is great. Let's push on now. We'll go for another 3. So we're looking to gain another 3 kilos, and that will take us up to a 10% gain. This next 3 kilos takes us a little bit longer. So we're now at, 35 weeks, say we gained 6 kilos total. Now you've got a couple of options. You can run a mini cut if you want to, and that mini cut could look to drop 3 kilos. And that 3 kilos is going to be strictly body fat that we're looking to part with. So it leaves us with, say, the 3 kilos of muscle that you've gained. It's not as cut and dried as that, I know, but for the argument of this, it is today. And that mini cut would be 6 weeks long, and then you've got another option. Okay, so this is where the long-term plan is so important. If you just keep going, right, we're going to do this for then, this for then, this for then, especially with the female clients that I've worked with, it's very easy for them to start backing out. It's very easy for you to start backing out, going, right, I'm done here, I want to diet again. But the whole point of having that long-term goal is that long-term goal was set when you weren't feeling the stress or the pressure of slightly more body weight on you. And you made that decision because long-term you knows that's the best decision to make. So long-term, we're saying, right, we are now going to gain for the next 12 months. We're going to slot 3 mini cuts into that at this point, this point, and this point. We are going to have a to be confirmed here because we're going to have a little catch up there just to make sure that we're all happy and things are going well. And if not, what we can do, if circumstances change, we can pull the plug on that and we can come out of that mini cut and we'll be at X body weight. So what's important there is not necessarily just each phase, it's actually sticking to a longer term plan, because if you don't do that, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to keep convincing yourself to keep going when really you're uncomfortable and you want to start dieting. So the long-term plan really is there to serve the long-term goal, but in between that, we need stepping stones to make that jump across the lake a little bit easier. Okay, so to kind of conclude that, I would say it's not a good idea to have open-ended gaining phases. It's great to have structure, it's great to have understanding, and it's great to have a direction, which means you know exactly where you're going at what times. Finally then, we have 2 questions from Gemma. So what is the best time to eat before standard workouts? Short runs, longer runs, or the above activities. So when it comes to your workouts, it really depends on 2 things, you and your digestion to the time that you train. Me personally, I like to train in the mornings, so I will train from 7 till 8:30, for example. So that means at 6:30, I'm usually going to wake up, say, I'll wake up at 6:15, around 6:15 to 6:30, I will have a bowl of really cheap kids cereal. So I'm not talking about high fiber. You do not want, in my opinion, a high fiber breakfast. You also don't want a high fat breakfast. You want to have a breakfast that is going to be pure carbohydrate. Now, for some of you who have a bit more time before they train, because I know some of you like to wake up a bit and then take a bit more time to get to the gym because you have got work and things like that, you might be able to get some oats in. Now, if you had, for me, if I had, say, 45 minutes to an hour between my eating and my training session, I probably would have a bowl of oats, because for me, they digest very well, they're very filling, and I enjoy them. But I don't. I have about 25 minutes between when I wake up and eat to when I train. So for me, I want to have something that's super easy digesting, super manageable in terms of it doesn't take me, a rocket science degree in order to make it in the mornings, and it needs to be stress-free. So I actually have things like Cocoa Pops, Crave, Honey Nut Cheerios, things that are typically very high in sugar and very low, if not any, fiber at all. I don't want fiber because I don't want to be, I have quite a sensitive stomach, TMI. So for me, I don't want to be putting things into my stomach pre-training that are going to speed up my digestion. Very unhelpful. Not to mention the fact that for me, I know that from years and years of managing this, if I eat a relatively heavy meal and then I go and train, because of the way that our bodies manage blood flow, I end up basically needing to go to the toilet halfway through a gym session, which is grossly unpleasant, and for me just puts me right off and it's very uncomfortable. So that's why. Now, from a fat perspective, the reason I don't tend to consume much, if any, fats around my workout is that because of the way that fat digests, it means that it's going to slow protein digestion, which is not very helpful when we're looking to get the most out of that protein in and around a workout. So I tend to push my fats as far away from my training as possible, and I tend to have much more fat in my evening meals, typically because I like cheese and I can put cheese on pretty much everything I eat. So yeah, that is what I would have. Now, that's kind of the best time to eat. I find it depends on you. I personally like to train without feeling hunger. I'm not someone who likes to feel hunger. I'd rather feel slightly over full than I would feel under. Equally, if I was caught for time, then you can use things like sugary drinks, like carb powders and things like that to help you as well. So yeah, I would say anywhere between 45 minutes and half an hour before that workout is going to be really, really good. So then we've got shorter and longer runs. Now, if I were going on a longer run, and I'm talking now about running anywhere between kind of an hour and a half and plus. This is not just a job of saying, right, I need to eat a lot before I go. This is actually the job of eating a lot in that kind of 24 to 12 hour window before you go. So the thing with duration activities, such as say half marathon running, which for most people is going to be around the 2 hour mark, you want to have a loaded carbohydrate base. It's not about saying, right, well, I didn't have much for dinner last night, I'll make sure I have a massive bowl of porridge before I go. Because you want to have the muscles saturated with glycogen, because it's a bit like filling your fuel tank before you go on a long journey. You don't want to have that petrol in the car, then trying to feed it in as you go, right? Because that's essentially what you'd be doing if you're trying to eat before you go. You want to have it ready, you want to be stored up, you want to be ready to rumble. So if we're looking at longer runs, we want to be making sure that the 12 to 24 hour window before that, we are doing a little bit of carb loading. Now, that's not the definition of carb loading. Carb loading is a structured methodology for endurance activity, which we're not going to discuss here. I can discuss it if you guys are interested, but that'll be it for another day. So if it's a short run, I would treat that just like I would a gym session. So anywhere between half an hour, well, anywhere between 0 and an hour, I would say. If we're then on longer runs, making sure that we have a really good 12-hour window before that, and then what we need to look at is having something that's very easily digestible pre-run, and then we're going to look at energy gels and things like that to keep us going, because for every kind of hour or so of activity, it depends. There's so many different equations you could use for this, but we need about 50 grams roughly, 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrate thereafter. So gels and drinks and things like that can become very, very helpful. If I were combining a run and a gym session on the same day, then your post-workout nutrition becomes super important. Put very vaguely, and this isn't exactly, well, it is true, but scientifically it's a bit different. Imagine after you've just been in the gym, okay, your muscles become vacuums to glycogen. They are ready for that. Now, we want to make sure that through that gym session and post-gym session, we are consuming a really great deal of carbohydrate, because what we're looking to do is restore the muscle glycogen so that when we're running later, it's already saturated and ready to go. If you have your gym session and then you don't bother eating for an hour or two, that is not, you're going to miss that window. You're going to miss that window of opportunity where the blood and the muscles are really receptive to pushing that glycogen into where it needs to go for where you need it later on in the day. In terms then of the macros, so the next question was, and what macros would you recommend eating before and after for optimal results? The way I do this personally, and the way I would recommend, if we're looking at workout, I put 50% of my carbohydrate per day in and around my workout. So personally, I have found, depending on how high my calories are, I personally have worked out that for me, about 35%, 25 to 35% pre-workout is fantastic, and then I'll load the rest afterwards. I quite like the 25-25 split. Typically, if I've got a big heavy leg day, I will go 35, because I want to have as much energy available to myself as I can do before I go through into that workout. Similarly, if it's an upper body day, sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I quite like to save my calories so I can have a massive bowl of porridge afterwards. And then I'll usually have, in terms of carbohydrates, so 50% around the workout. I'll then have most likely 20 to 25% for lunch, and then the rest for dinner. Actually, at the moment, I'm working on like a 20% for lunch and then a 30% for dinner. Just seems to work better for my lifestyle and it's easier. And I would recommend doing similar. Protein, I would just split up throughout the day. If you're looking at 160 grams, that's 440 gram loads, easy peasy. Protein shake after you've trained, nice big lunch, snack, big dinner. sorted, easy peasy. And then finally, in terms of fats, I would keep them as low as possible in and around the workout. As I said, it's not optimal for digestion of protein and things such like. So typically I would then make my lunch and dinner far more fat orientated. So I would be thinking, I need to get fats in my snack, which I usually have around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I need to get fats into my lunch and then fats into my dinner. For me, I have about 40 grams of fat a day, so it's actually super easy, especially when, like I said earlier, I can load up on cheese. Folks, that is all for me today. If you have any questions yourself, please ask away. I'd love to hear them. If you would like any help with anything else, let me know. Apart from that, have a wonderful day. Take good care.